Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I'm here today to do a Friday Reads video where I wrap up the week in reading and movies and, anything that I find interesting, but mostly reading and books and book-related things. This has been another interesting week. There's just been a lot going on. It's been busy, so my reading has kind of suffered. I did manage to finish a book on audio. We'll talk about that when we get to the Friday Reads portion of this video, and I have a couple of things ongoing right now and like a lot building up. We'll talk about that when we get to the Friday Reads portion as well. Two things I want to mention before I get to the Friday Reads portion of this video is, the first one is that Percival Everett announced that he has a new book coming out, and he is writing a book that tells the story of Huckleberry Finn from the perspective of Jim, who is I believe he's an enslaved man that Huckleberry Finn travels with. I've actually never read Huckleberry Finn, which is one of my interesting points about this. I feel like this announcement is something that could potentially get me to read Huckleberry Finn, because I think it would be interesting to read both sides of that story. And me being the Pulitzer nerd that I am, not gonna lie, part of me is really hoping that this means Percival Everett is finally going to win a Pulitzer Prize. He's been in the conversation since he was a finalist for Telephone, and he did not win for that one. I believe he lost to The Night Watchman by Louise Erich. I believe that's correct, because I think last year he would have been eligible for The Trees and lost to the Netanyahus. And he wasn't even a finalist for that one. But that is a book that was very much in awards conversation throughout the year. I don't think Dr. No, the book that he released last year, would be much of a contender for this year, but I'm working on my Pulitzer Prize predictions for next month. So they announced that the Pulitzer Prize is going to be announced in May this year, and it's usually done in April. That's a little annoying for me, but the pandemic has made things kind of like the Wild West in terms of when they announce it. So at least it's not June, but I'm still going to try to get my predictions out in March. I'm working on that. Point being, this feels like something that is not only from an author who has been in the conversation with the Pulitzer Prize before, but it is a type of book that the Pulitzer Prize has really responded to before. I'm thinking specifically of March by Geraldine Brooks, which tells the story of Little Women, but from the perspective of the father who is not there. And I just think that's really interesting. So it will be fascinating to see what happens when the book is released and when people start really talking about it. I am very interested in it. I still need to read The Trees. I really need to read The Trees. And a lot of people have been talking about it again lately, just kind of hammering the fact that I really need to get to it. So I need to get to that. I need to do Huckleberry Finn, and then I will be ready for the new Percival Everett. I will have a link to an article down below where this announcement was talked about. So check it out if you'd like more information. There's not a whole lot right now, but I am really excited about this. And let me know if you are excited about it as well. The other thing I wanted to talk about before we get into the Friday Reads is, if you know me, you know that I am also, my side hustle, in addition to books, is that I'm kind of obsessed with the Academy Awards. They are going to be in March, and this year has been a little bit frustrating because since the pandemic, most of the movies have been very quickly available on streaming. And this year, that has not been the case. They are very much trying to get you to go back to a theater, which is, it's fine. I get it. I want to support theaters, but the theater in my town is not great. It's not a great experience, and it's much more of a commercial theater. So these smaller Oscar movies tend not to be there. And if they are, it's for a very limited time. And if you miss it, that's it. It's gone. So that's really frustrating for me this year. However, there are some that I've been able to watch. I watched Elvis with Joel and really did not like it. That was on HBO Max here in the United States. But the one I want to talk about today is the new adaptation of All Quiet on the Western Front, which is on Netflix here in the United States. I had kind of thought that maybe I should wait to watch it to read the book first, because I've never read the book that it is based on. This is an interesting case as well, because there was an adaptation of All Quiet on the Western Front before, and it actually won Best Picture. And this is sort of similar to the conversation with West Side Story last year. The original adaptation won Best Picture, and now there's a chance, but it's probably unlikely that it will do it again this year. So I was liking the movie, although it's a very difficult watch. It's also very long. It is almost 3 hours, I believe. And there's a lot of graphic violence, as you can expect in a war movie that is about an extremely violent war set on the front lines where most of the violence was happening. It's very difficult to watch from that perspective. But I thought it was a good movie, and I was thinking that when I ranked it on Letterboxd, it was going to be like a 5-star movie. And then it started getting toward the end. And no spoilers, I won't say anything, but the way something starts to go down toward the end of the movie, I was thinking to myself, this really doesn't make sense. Why would the characters do this? It just does not make sense to me. And the thought popped into my head, I wonder if this is how it happens in the book. So I got online, because one of the benefits of the book being as old as it is that there's a lot of information online about it. And it turns out that's not how things happen in the book. And it actually gets worse, because as I was kind of skimming through articles about how that does not happen in the book, there's another really different thing that happens in the end of the book. And it's another thing that's like, why is this happening? It doesn't make sense. And that's not how it happened historically. That's not how it happened in the book. And I got really upset about that and frustrated. And I'm going to put a link down below to an article about the differences in the ending. So obviously don't look at the article if you would rather avoid spoilers for the movie or the book. But to me, it's just, it completely undermines the book. And as I was reading more about the book and all of that, it turns out there are other differences in there that, and the movie is kind of using the violence as a shorthand for the horrors of war. But the book goes much deeper than just that and talks about the psychological toll of war. And you only get that from the violence and the sort of shocked expression on the protagonist's face in it. And the book finds other more nuanced ways of making that message sort of ripple out into other things, like even soldiers who go home are unable to adapt to the world. And none of that is in the movie. So part of me thinks it would be an interesting adaptation to dig a little deeper on. Part of me is just mad at the adaptation. And it's interesting because The Power of the Dog is something that I did a comparison of the book versus the movie. I'll link it down below. Nomadland is something I did a book versus movie comparison, and I'll link that one down below as well. And those are situations where there are drastic changes from the book to the film. However, in the instance of The Power of the Dog, I still think it's a successful adaptation because they made changes that enhanced things that are in the book. And some of the things that they left out are still sort of intimated in the movie. And some things just, you still get the point of it, although you might be missing a lot of context. So the movie still has the essence of the book. And I think that's pretty good. Nomadland takes an element of a larger nonfiction book and expands it into a more human story. So it is part of the conversation in the book. It's not just doing the whole book, as you might expect. So in those cases, it's a pretty big departure, but I'm okay with it. But in this one, I feel like it just really damaged the tone of the book. However, I'm saying this without having read the book. So the reason I'm bringing it up here is I'm very curious if you've read All Quiet on the Western Front, if you have seen the new adaptation of the movie, let me know what you think about it in the comment section down below. And if you're afraid of spoilers, don't look at the comments about All Quiet on the Western Front. But I really struggle with it because I feel like the way the characters behave in the end of the movie does not make sense. And then to find out that that is not how it happens in the book. And not only that, but another thing they add is something that's inaccurate to the book and inaccurate historically is just driving me a little nuts. So let me know in the comment section down below. Have you read All Quiet on the Western Front? Have you seen the movie? What did you think? I'm inclined to be angry, but I haven't read the book. So let me know. With that, let's move into the Friday Reads portion of the video. I'm going to try to keep this short because, again, it's been a week. Not going to get into it, but Joel has been traveling for work this week, and Jamie has been a little sick. So that has been stressful. as you can imagine. And that kind of sapped my strength for reading a lot this week. I did manage to finish an audiobook, actually just this morning. And that is the only thing that I managed to finish this week. And I went through the audio much more slowly. The only reason I was able to finish an audio and make progress on it is that a lot of things I was doing for work were kind of mindless little things that I could listen to an audiobook while doing. So during the workday, I got a lot of listening done while I was doing work. And that's the only reason I made progress on that. Let's just talk about that book first, because I loved that book a lot. It's Fanny Herself by Edna Ferber. Such a good book. Such a good book. And actually, I'm going to grab something off of my Pulitzer shelf because it relates to that. So bear with me. I can do this actually very quickly. It relates to his family, which is something that I had just finished for my Pulitzer Prize for Fiction project. I'm trying to read all of the books that have won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. This is an interesting book, His Family, because it is the first winner of the Pulitzer Prize. And for this year, I was really interested in other books that were published the same year because I wanted to get a sense of the publishing landscape at the time. When I did a video about the first year that the Pulitzer Prizes existed, in which there was no Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, I didn't see a lot of options for books that could have potentially been a contender. And it's interesting as well because there were only, I think, 6 submissions for the Pulitzer Prize that year, and only 5 of them were actually eligible. So they decided to take a pass on the prize. I don't know how many books were submitted when His Family won. And I don't know if Fanny Herself would have been submitted. But again, I just kind of wanted to get a sense of the general publishing landscape. And for this year, it just so happens that there are 2 interesting things going on. One is that all of these books are old enough that there aren't copyrights. So you can find editions of Fanny Herself or His Family or other books, some of which I will talk about in a moment because I might read 2 of the other ones online. They're available. There's no copyright on them. So you can find them through like Project Gutenberg, or there are PDFs online. There are audio productions of them. So I listened to an audio production of Fanny Herself. I'm putting up a pretty jacket that comes from the early days of the book. I'm going to take it down now and I'll show you what the audio that I listened to looks like. It, to me, is an appalling jacket design, like really terrible. It makes this look like a cozy mystery, and there's nothing wrong with a cozy mystery, but that is very much not what Fanny Herself is. To me, it's appalling. So I'm not using this. I'm going to use this instead. It's much more appropriate, much prettier. But anyway, so I'm just trying to get a sense of the landscape. And because this year has so many books that are available because there's no copyright, I can. So I don't know how far into that I want to go because I do want to put this Pulitzer Prize deep dive to bed. But I definitely wanted to try Fanny Herself because the premise of the book really intrigued me. And Edna Ferber is actually a Pulitzer Prize winner. Let me grab another book. It's handy to have this Pulitzer section right here. I have a Franklin Library edition of So Big, which is the book that Edna Ferber won a Pulitzer Prize for. And the reason I wanted to grab the book is because I don't remember what year she won, but it's not long after 1917, which is the year in which His Family was published. Let's see. It was the Pulitzer Prize novel for 1925. So she did ultimately win a Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, and that made this interesting to me as well. But then there was just the premise of the book that grabbed my attention, and it's available for an audio on Scribd. Ignore the cover, but the audio is on Scribd. So I listened to it, and I just loved it. I'm kind of rambling about why I read this book, so hopefully, it's been a week. Allow me to indulge. Last week, I didn't even feel like talking. This week, I feel like distraction, so bear with me a little bit. The book follows Fanny Brandeis. The beginning of the book actually follows her mother a little bit. And the structure of this book is really interesting because Edna Ferber kind of wanted it to feel like she's having a conversation with you as she writes the book. And that reminds me a little bit of Fried Green Tomatoes by Fanny Flagg, which is a book that definitely feels like someone is telling you a story and you're just enthralled by that. It's not quite the same. There aren't as many like quirky little details. Fanny Herself is much more grounded in realism and realistic takes on characters than Fried Green Tomatoes. which is grounded in real life, but it's much more quirky and eccentric, and that is not Fanny herself. So Fanny, in the beginning, is a child, and Edna Ferber basically tells us, like, Fanny is going to be the focus of the story, but you can't talk about Fanny without talking about her mother. So let's get to know her first. And it creates this really great conversational vibe that carries through the entire book, to the point where even when you meet another character who is a child with Fanny, Edna Ferber will pretty much point blank say, now this kid might not seem like much, but remember him because he's going to be the hero of this story. And again, not a spoiler because Edna Ferber tells you that when you meet the character. It's a really interesting way of doing it. Edna Ferber pulls it off. This is a very wryly funny book in a lot of places. It's a very deep, emotional, and poignant book, especially because it involves a lot of different things that were happening in the year in which these books were published. It deals with World War I because, again, this is published in 1917. World War I has been going on in Europe. And it deals with industrialism and socialism, which is a topic that was of huge concern at the time. I will mention in my Pulitzer Prize deep dive that even Ernest Poole had written a book previously published in 1915 that is basically propaganda for socialism. And World War I is the thing that sort of snapped that back and turned socialism into a buzz scary word. So this is kind of centered in the same thing. And with industrialism comes all of the concerns about how to live an authentic and human life in the face of machinery and how jobs are kind of turning into machinery. This is a book that is more than 100 years old, and it feels like it is extremely relatable to the way the world works now. So Molly, Fanny's mother, has a store that she had with her husband. Her husband dies, and she begins to run the store. And throughout Fanny's childhood, her mother is concerned about external forces that could impact her business, such as the mail order business, and how mail order is so easy for people to do from home. They can skip the experience of coming into the store completely, and they'll go for the convenience, and they can undercut the prices and all of that stuff. And Molly is concerned that she is not going to be able to keep her store going in the face of that threat. How much does that sound like existing threats that have been happening decade by decade by decade ever since? It was superstores for a while when I was a child. Independent bookstores were concerned that Barnes & Noble and Borders were going to drive them out of business. And superstores like Walmart and things were going to drive hardware stores, and Lowe's, Home Depot, they were going to drive hardware stores and other stores out of business. So it's been an ongoing conversation for the last 100 years. And then today you have stores that are under threat by online retail, like Amazon. So it just feels so relevant to everything. It also deals with a woman making her way in the world and into the business world and how difficult that was. It deals with suffrage. It deals with the fact that Fanny is Jewish. There's so many things that it is juggling, and it does all of them really well and says interesting things about all of them. There is some outdated language really in a segment toward the end, but there's a little bit scattered throughout. Terminology that doesn't get used. I don't think it tips into racism or anything like that, but they're just outdated words. And I might even do a separate video where I talk about this book. I liked it that much. I need to see if I have the bandwidth to actually write a review and prepare something. I'm just talking off the cuff right now. You can probably tell because I'm all over the place. But I just really loved this book a lot. And it also deals with grief because, and this is not really a spoiler because, again, it's kind of intimated hey, Molly's going to exit the story fairly early on, and then we're going to be talking about Fanny. So it deals with the grief of losing someone that you love and whom you have respected and who had shaped your perspective of the world and everything that you find important and value. And it talks about how grief can make you turn away from those values and the ways in which it can do that. It's a really interesting and sort of twisted process, but it does happen. So after her mother dies, Fanny becomes concerned that her mother was taken advantage of, that nobody appreciated her mother, that she worked so hard every single day, And now the only person who really remembers her mother is her, and she worries about that. So she pivots and wants to go into the business world. She gets a job at one of those mail order companies. This all happens in the first half of the book, by the way. And starts making innovations that remind you of things you hear about what goes on in an Amazon warehouse where they do the shipping. And it's not that Fanny means bad, it's that that's what business is. And she is struggling to find a place for her humanity, or whether or not she can carry her humanity with her, when that is the concern of business. Everything has to be faster, more efficient, cheaper, and all of that stuff. I thought this was just a fantastic book. And again, the benefit of this book is, and same with his family, there's no copyright. So if you're interested in this book, you probably won't find it in your local independent bookstore. You probably won't find it in your local used bookstore. I actually went to my local used bookstore to find more books by Edna Ferber. And by the way, I really can't wait to get to So Big now, because I enjoyed this so much. They did not have a copy of Fanny herself. You're probably unlikely to find it. They did have two others. Spoiler for my book haul. Let me show you what they had. I'm all over the place today. They had a reproduction of the 1926 first edition of Showboat. Yes, Edna Ferber wrote Showboat, which was adapted into the musical that is famous. It has the song Old Man River, which was adapted into a movie. And she also wrote Giant, which was adapted into a movie that is really popular. And they had a copy of this book, Ice Palace, which is about Alaska and its move to statehood. So you can tell I'm an Edna Ferber fan now. I love this book. Like I said, if I can find the bandwidth to sit down, do a full review, I would love to do that, because I think there's a lot more to talk about with this book. But it's fantastic. Point just being, you probably won't find a copy of Fanny herself in your local store, but it is available to you. You can get PDFs online. You can find audios that people have produced and put out there for you. It'll have an atrocious cover, probably, depending on what's available to you. But I just loved it. So I really wanted to talk about it here. So that's the book that I finished. And in my right mind, I would have finished this book much earlier in the week. Probably 2 to 3 days earlier. I took a much slower approach to it, really only listened during the day when I had time for work because of everything else going on. But I also was kind of savoring the story of Fanny and loving it. So I absolutely recommend this book. If you've read it or any other book by Edna Ferber, let me know in the comment section down below. Jamie's barking. I apologize. Nothing I can do about it. She's not even in the same room as me, so I'm just going to keep talking. I'm very curious about Giant. My local used bookstore did have a copy of that, but it was a paperback and it was really beaten up, so I didn't get it. And of course, So Big is part of my Pulitzer Prize project, but I would be very curious if you've read her and Edna Ferber, that is, and what you would recommend. And if you haven't read Fanny herself, I would absolutely recommend it. I should mention, I did finish Fingersmith, the Sarah Waters book that was the first book for the books that Jen the Librarian and I chose for the Queer TBR Tackle. I'll have information about the Queer TBR Tackle down below and a link to Jen's channel. And I mentioned last week that I had some trouble with this book, because last week I really struggled and was just tired. And I'm tired this week. You can probably see I have massive bags under my eyes. Haven't been sleeping, which might be why I'm a little bit giddy today. Anyway, doesn't matter. I got to the end of the first part of this book, and there was a twist, of course, because this is a book about con men and sort of conning people and thieves. So you know there are going to be twists going into it. So there's a big twist at the end of part 1, and I was like, oh, this is exciting. I wonder what the next part is going to be. And then I looked, and I was only 30% into the book. And instead of feeling thrilled, like, oh, there's a lot more left, so many more twists are going to come, I felt exhausted. Like, oh, no. So I cheated. I went on Wikipedia, read the summary of the book, so I knew everything that was going to happen in the book, and that actually really helped me through the book. So my first read of Fingersmith ended up being like someone else's second read of Fingersmith, where you know what's going to happen, and you can sort of appreciate the groundwork that is being laid for all of the twists that are to come. And I actually enjoyed that. It is, of course, a beautifully, beautifully, beautifully written book because it's Sarah Waters. I've only read The Paying Guests before, and I look forward to reading more of Sarah Waters in the future. I don't think it's any fault of Sarah Waters that I had a difficult time and that I was feeling exhausted by the twists. I also don't know that I can erase that sensation from this read of the book, because that's just where I'm at right now emotionally. I don't think it was necessarily fair to the book. And I talked about that a lot more in my last Friday Reads video, because that kind of came out in another book that I had been reading last week. But I did finish this, and I enjoyed it, but I definitely think the only way I was going to get through was using the method that I did, where I just looked online, found out all the spoilers, and used that knowledge to help carry me through to the end. So that was Fingersmith. And then I was really struggling, having a hard time picking up a book. I mentioned, I can't remember if it was January. I think it was January. I read a TinTin book that my neighbors had recommended. We had a conversation about TinTin, and I had read some of the stories back when I was like 18 years old, and they loaned one of the books to me. And I didn't know that at the time, but it was a two-parter. So I borrowed The Seven Crystal Balls, which is this one right here. And Prisoners of the Sun is the conclusion of that story. And obviously it's really tiny. So one night I just wanted distraction and couldn't focus on my actual physical book that I'm reading. So I picked this up and tore through it. And it was fun. I don't know what else I could say about it other than that. I wish I had read these when I was a younger child, because I would have loved them. It is problematic and outdated depictions of people in South America, for sure, and Inca civilization. And there's what is supposed to be a sort of clapback at the people who are the bad guys of the book. So they have cursed people and kidnapped someone and brought them back for stealing artifacts that they had discovered, archaeologists. And what they say to TinTin is, these things were stolen from us. And TinTin's response to them is, well, you're not considering now, because they took those artifacts, they are going to teach your civilization and its history to other people. It's actually a good thing. And the bad guys are like, oh, okay, fair point. Reading that from a 2023 perspective is kind of like, okay, but also maybe give them their stuff back. So it's interesting. And that's TinTin. The physical book that I was working on is the same one that I was working on last week, The Grapes of Wrath. Did not make a lot of progress. I can't remember where I was at this time last week, but I'm on chapter 10 now, and I've been stuck on chapter 10 for days. I did pick it up and try to read it. I don't remember if it was last night or the night before, and was really having trouble absorbing anything. I feel like my retention capability is much better suited to audio right now, especially because I'm trying to take notes as I go through this, and there's a lot to take notes on with this. So this sort of requires a lot of active participation on my part, and I'm just not there right now. So this is going to take a little longer. That's fine. I'm doing this as a buddy read with Joel. I had gotten out my Franklin Library edition of it to show you, and then I buried it underneath all of these other books. Here it is. It's really pretty. I talked about it in a book haul already. I will say, because I have this edition that I can read, and because this is not a great edition of it, I got it at my local used bookstore. I'm actually annotating in the book. I'm allowing myself to do that because, I got this so I could read it and not feel guilty about reading this and potentially damaging it. I will say, for a Franklin Library edition, I'm not as much of a fan of the illustrations in this one as I am for the illustrations in pretty much any of the others. But, it's a beautiful book, and I'm never going to complain about that. And I'll continue working on The Grapes of Wrath. Hopefully, over the weekend, I can spend some time with it and get some sleep. And that will, I don't even know what I'm saying. It will allow me to get back into the world of reading this book, because I am enjoying it, and I very much want to continue and finish and see where I get. And then, when that's done, I've got a problem. In terms of things coming up, I need to get back to The Life to Come. I put this to the side because I wanted to buddy read The Grapes of Wrath with Joel, and he had put a hold on the audio. He's doing this by audio. I've committed to at least attempting every Pulitzer book in physical form, so I need to do it this way. But so we decided we would time it to when the audio became available to him, and it became available. So that meant I pushed the E.M. Forster read-along book for February. Actually, there are 2 different short story collections. Some people are reading The Celestial Omnibus, and others are reading The Life to Come and other stories. I obviously have a copy of this one. And there will be information about the E.M. Forster read-along down below as well. So I pushed this to the side, and we're coming to the end of February, so I don't know. I might have to catch up to this one in March, the way things are going. And if I do, it's going to be fine. But I haven't read a single story in this yet, and it's supposed to be the book for February. And in March, there will be another E.M. Forster book to read. It is what it is. The other problem I'm having is that I've had a sort of library backlog, like things that were supposed to have a lot of holds became available. I have 4 library books all of a sudden that I need to deal with. And I'm sort of struggling with physical book reading right now. So I kind of have a plan. 2 of the books are not due until March 17th. That's 84 Charing Cross Road and Vagabonds by Elagosa Asunde. I talked about this one because it was one of the A.L. Lane notable books. I'll have a link to that video down below as well. And 84 Charing Cross Road was one of Joel's favorite books that he read last year. And we watched the movie in January, and I knew I wanted to read it, but the hold list was a little long. So we watched the movie, and now I'm going to read the book. So these are not due until March 17th. I'm probably going to wait until March for them. I have The Philosopher Queens. Jen the Librarian had recommended that I do this for the prompt in the Montana Book Company's reading challenge for 2023. Read a book by a female philosopher. This is a little bit of a cheat because it's not a book of philosophy in and of itself. However, I do think it sort of meets the spirit of the challenge because it is educating about female philosophers. So this, to me, should be an easy book to breeze through in a weekend when I'm in my right mind for physical books. And it's due in early March. I'm going to see how I get along with Grapes of Wrath, and then I might just pick this up and try to get through it quickly because it'll fit that prompt for the reading challenge for me. The one that I have a time crunch on is My Government Needs to Kill Me by Rashid Newson, who, by the way, is a great follow on Instagram as well. And I really want to read this book. I really do. But it's a 14-day loan, and I was able to renew it once. And it's going to be due on March 3rd. So I'm thinking if I finish The Grapes of Wrath, I'm just going to push the E.M. Forster stories to a later date in March and try to do this next and be done. And if I keep it another day or two, I apologize to the other people who have this book on hold at my local library, but I'm going to probably hold on to it another couple of days until I finish because I really want to read this book. I actually have access to the audio of the book, but I don't know how it would work because there are footnotes in this book. And so if you've actually listened to the audio of My Government Needs to Kill Me, let me know if this works in audio format because I'm a little skeptical because there's a lot of really interesting information about things going on in the 80s in there. And I don't want to miss that. So let me know if you've listened to this on audio and if it does have all of that information. But I think that physical book is going to be the way I need to do it for that. So anyway, I've rambled and been all over the place. It's been that kind of a week. Yeah, it just has. So I'll leave it at that and stop rambling. I don't know how to end this video even. So, but anyway, that's what I've been reading. That's what I've been watching. That's what I'm excited for that's coming up. I would love to hear what you have had going on in any of those capacities in the comment section down below. I would also say last week after I didn't really want to post the Friday reads, but I did. I really sort of checked out from keeping on top of comments over the weekend, and then I was never really able to catch up But there were a lot of really nice comments on my last Friday Reads video, and I profoundly appreciate that. I did see them. I just have not really been able to respond. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't deserve any of you. It is, I always say it at the end of every video, but I hope you know I do mean it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your comments, and the fact that anybody wants to watch any of my videos, especially when I'm as rambly as this. Really, just, I love it. So I will leave it at that. Thank you for your time. And as always, I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.